humanity's desire to be involved. There's like a drive for involvement that people have, and so like that's why did people start making art or crafting objects? Like, and we're always going to want to do something. But one thing that I've used very often that's very simple, one structure. It's so simple it seems almost silly, but most people haven't done it. If you realize there's something that you're good at but you really don't like and people keep asking you to do, you can work actively to kill that thing and say, I don't want to do that anymore. Design is not about you expressing yourself in the way that art might be.
Welcome to this episode of Now and Next. My name is Kia, host and producer of Now and Next. In today's episode, I'm going to have a very exclusive talk with Jack Mitchell, Senior UX Strategist, product designer, and design leader. We are going to talk about his past, his studies, project that he is so proud of, and his opinion about the AI and the future of the design. So, I don't know, Jack, I was thinking always like how to start the podcast or the episode like myself. It's a difficult situation. Again, as I said, it's a kind of uncomfortable situation for myself. I'm not really good at starting the talks, but maybe just, introduce yourself very shortly.
Yeah, I mean, what is there to say? I think introductions, you learn them over time in the professional, you learn the things you have to say. And you say, I'm this and I do this. But I think, what is there to say in this context? I mean, obviously my name's Jack Mitchell. That's the first part. And I work in the area of digital product design. I was, until recently, director of product at MDX, which was an innovation unit of Meta Design, a design agency. But I had a bit of a unusual career path in some ways. It's been quite varied. I also worked in an area of startups before that, and also personal data. But I've also done various other things when I was a bit younger on the side, in terms of creativity and art. I was a photographer. I've done various, and I actually studied languages and linguistics, which I'm sure you're going to bring up.
Exactly.
But
those are the things that I saw in your LinkedIn. I was like, wow. Okay.
Ultimately, I kind of settled on this product design thing because I'm interested in how things work. I've always been interested in, I have a lot of hobbies and a lot of them they have technical details or rabbit holes to go down. So there's like guitars. I'm super geeky about guitars, also cycling and bikes, building bikes. Photography is also something that can be very geeky. And also now skating, I got into inline skating, and that's also
really?
a whole, I'm quite geeky about that too now. So I mean, it's the product design thing was something that I was always also into technology and things like how things work and gadgets and things that we can use. Also gaming, I was a big gamer when I was younger. And so this just made a lot of sense for me when I found out. I realized at some point that like digital product design, and particularly kind of UX, UI design, interaction design, or product concept is something that brings those things together. It's like I was like, oh, that's a job. I can do that as a job. That's cool. Because you're problem solving, you're using technology, you're thinking about how people do things, how people think and how they interact with the world around them using tools. Like it just made, suddenly when I realized that was a job, that was very exciting to me. And that's kind of, it made sense of this kind of meeting of a lot of the different things that are natural about my personality. So that's kind of how I ended up there in an abstract way.
You went through all my questions actually. First thing.
But we can go deeper.
Yeah, no worries. I'm just saying it. Again, yesterday I was checking your LinkedIn and I saw the subject that you have studied, and I was like, I mean, it's interesting. Like, how did you? It's not kind of a switch, because I understand also the language is kind of a part of communication, and a part of a product design is also communication.
Yeah.
But what was the reason that you study? Can you tell me again what did you study actually?
So I said the official title of my degree was just German. It was literally just called
Germanic
German.
Literature, huh? Kind of German, German.
The title was BA German, and but the actual content then was a mixture of things. So there was literature, which I was also very interested in, language and literature in general, There was linguistics, which I also found fascinating even from a structure standpoint of learning languages. Like I speak a few languages, and I find it very interesting, like how languages work in general, like facts about languages. I'm always at
Mhm.
parties. You can find me like asking people about about their language. Oh, that's how you do that in this language. Um, and then there's also the creative. There's things about film, and there's philosophy also. So it was a degree that had a lot in it, and I was kind of trying to choose between English literature, which is obviously my native language, or something that was a bit more. It had that and more stuff, and that's why I picked German. I was already studying it in school, and I felt that I could again, like bring together a few of my different interests inside of this one degree. But it wasn't as often. Germans asked me, did you want to become a German teacher? And that was never my plan. I think in the UK, the studying, at least at that time, was a little bit, it's not that long ago, not that old, but like, I think it has changed as it's got more expensive. But
Mhm.
studying still has that sometimes that aspect of doing what you find most interesting, studying for the sake of studying,
Mhm.
particularly at undergraduate level, because you learn to learn. So if
Mhm.
you're passionate about it and you're interested, unless you specifically want to be an engineer or a doctor or things that have a structured like learning path, then you can study almost anything and you'll still learn things. It doesn't mean you have to be a professional German at the end. That was not really the
Yeah. Yeah.
goal.
Yeah. I
So that
understand.
was really my justification. Also, when you're 17, what do you know about what you want to do? It's
Oh, that was
like,
my also one of the things that I wanted to bring up when you started to study the subject. Did you have any idea that how you want to go further with, or just happens to?
so like a little secret about my future career. Someone asked me that, like, I think it was halfway through the degree or something. People started to think about careers, and there were career fairs and stuff that people got very stressed about it. What am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do after university. How will I get a job? And I never really felt that stressed. And someone asked me, what is your ideal job? Uh, and the answer at the time was, I would love to be paid for people to ask me what I think about things.
Okay,
Which
that's
sounds, I mean,
interesting.
that sounds like way more, I think, self aggrandizing or self obsessed than I meant it, but more like I think what it tells me now is that I was just fascinated by taking things apart and saying, okay, well, how is this really working? Like, how do I solve this problem? Essentially, I wanted people to bring me their problems and for me to
Mhm.
go, I wonder how we solved this. And so if you think about it that way, there is a kind of abstract but quite clear connection to things like design,
Yes.
particularly digital design, where you're kind of, human centric design. That kind of makes a lot of sense. I just didn't know that was a thing at that time.
When did you get exposed to the world of design?
Um,
While you were
I mean,
studying?
so I started photography very young.
So
So I
after
started
you studied
doing
the German, you went to before.
before.
Okay.
So I did my first paid photography job when I was 17. So I
Hmm.
was quite young. I was into it when I was probably 15, and I started going on forums and, using Photoshop, using tools, doing all of this stuff. So I didn't think of it as design, but, you're using
Hmm.
design tools and you're thinking about composition. You're also thinking about the technical aspect, the constraints of the device itself, and so on. So there's a lot of, so I think that was my first real exposure to design was that. I just
Interesting.
didn't view it like that. But then after university, I started working in this long-running startup. It's a startup because of the size, but it had been around for almost 10 years when I joined. That dealt with personal data. That's Midex in my
Mhm.
CV. Um, and that was a thing about
Yeah, I just want to interrupt you here because it was very interesting. So you're telling me that your very first job was photography, like the
yeah.
professional job that you started.
It was like 2007, I think,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah,
And you continue doing that until 2018, I guess.
yeah. Until I
Yeah.
started at Meta
That's
Design.
I just want to know how did you land in your first design job? But I guess photography was something that you were doing like on side. So your
Yeah.
first real job was, I
So
guess, the one that you said in the startup. Huh?
yeah, so that wasn't design. So like I said, that was communications. So then I was kind of finding ways to explain in more simple terms or express, because I was using the languages side, right? So there was this clear connection with using language and that my understanding of like how to write things, how to explain things, but also technology to kind of help Midex with how do we talk about what we're building, because it's kind of complicated, but it's also something like this it's built for people. It's like it was a community interest company, like a social enterprise. And so it was about, and also a topic that everyone became. It was fascinating, actually. Like a few years later, then there were things like, Edward Snowden and the various Facebook scandals, like Cambridge Analytica and all of these things. GDPR then started to be drafted, but people weren't talking about that when I joined, and then it became a topic. But so that I did an internship there, and very quickly, like I made a video that kind of tried to summarize what they were doing. I just kind of made it with no real briefing. I think maybe they said, "Can you make a video about what we do?" It was almost like a test for me as well. And I think that they were so pleased. In fact, I remember the specific, and I wonder if David will watch this, my old boss, but I remember very specifically what he said to me when I sent him the video. He said, "Jack, your video made me laugh out loud with pure joy." And and that was really, I mean, he was very, I learned a lot from David, but that reaction kind of told me that maybe that I was onto something with this. I didn't know if it was good or not at that time, but I said, okay, clearly I've done something right here. That's great. That was me like fresh out of university. That got me interested in this talking about technology aspects. It's still not design though, but it's getting closer to this digital product.
Yes, yes, indeed. So you said that you started as a basically intern there, and then you continue working there.
Yeah.
Because in this part, I want to also learn a little bit about the experiences that you gain while you were looking for your very first job, as a designer or in design industry. Like, so when you are, as you mentioned, you're a junior, you graduated recently, and then you are looking for a job, or if you want to switch your job, for example, I don't know, from the field that you were working towards something a little bit different.
So I think that there's maybe like rather than going chronologically, because there's like the bit where I also went into design, which was very by chance, to some degree by chance. I actually did to summarize it in like 2 sentences, I was asked by a friend of mine who I was working with doing communications. He got an email from a small agency who said, "We need someone to lead a communications part of a project that has to be in German and English. Do you know anyone?" And he literally showed me the email. I was sitting next to him, and he said, "Do you want to do this?" Because he was running a small agency too, so he got an email. And I said, "Sure." And then I worked with this company, and they were contracted by Meta Design to do this part of the project. Sometimes you use a third party to kind of do certain aspects, particularly big communications. Like it was a lot of writing and things that Meta Design doesn't usually do. And that's how I got in contact with Meta Design at all. I ended up sitting there, but working for the smaller agency. And then I met Stephen, who would then become my boss. And he had just joined towards the end of this project as the new head of user experience. The short part is everything, the project was a bit, things went a little bit wrong. There was like some challenges in the project that was current at that time, neither of which we'd begun. We'd come into the project later. And some people left the company, and I was one of the last people left who knew anything about the structure of the website.
I see.
And then I was kind of talking to the developers, talking to the design team, saying, no, this is how it has to work. This is the connections between the things. This is how the contact form should work. Doing actually kind of UX-y things. I had no idea. I was just trying to fix it because it was on fire, And Stephen said, "So, what are you doing after this? I think this might be a really good job for you. We're looking for like a UX strategist." So that was my entry into the world to be, and I often made jokes about that later to my team. It's like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing, but because that was the beginning. But in terms of advice, like when you're saying, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of the process? Because I had to do that then later for a lot of team members who were also saying, what should I do? Or people who wanted to move on or were undecided about how they wanted to progress. I think that there's a degree of openness. Like if we think about what would you say to in a design process to designers at the beginning of a project? If you're in a discovery phase, you have to discover, right? You don't want to converge on a solution too early. And it's exactly the same thing that you should do when you're thinking like at all of these different stages. As long as you can identify which stage you're at in this process. If you're in a stage where you should be deciding, converging, then, there are tools for that. You can draw on the design thinking toolbox and say, okay, I can do dot voting. I can do like various different processes to converge on a solution. But if I'm in the discover phase, really just apply what you would say in a project. Okay, I'm going to do affinity mapping. I'm going to do like a lot of research and not close myself off to certain things. Because if I'd said no to that project, or if I'd said, oh, this is not my job, I'm not going to talk about the contact form on that website because I'm only here for the content, I would never have, landed in the UX area.
I was reading something interesting that luck is not kind of something magical. It's basically someone's openness to new situations.
Mm-hmm.
If you, of course, expose yourself to new situations, then most probably you have a higher luck, so to say, to kind of get better achievement or better things that you're looking for. Huh?
I think that's very true. Yeah.
That means you have never went through like interview.
I've interviewed a lot of people, but I've not been on the other side of the table myself. No.
That's interesting. So that's also possible then, huh?
For the internship, I did do it actually. The very beginning, I did an interview, but that's different expectations when it's an intern. It's slightly different. It's not 10 rounds or whatever. With these things that people do now, these insane levels of 6 rounds and a case study and this and that. I mean, in the US, I think it's even, you see a lot of LinkedIn posts about this. Particularly I think for developers, but sometimes also for design. Can you do this little thing for us, this task? And you just think, and then of course there's the idea that they steal the result and then say, unfortunately, it didn't work out.
Yeah.
But so I think don't do that. But yeah, I've never actually been through that process. I also found it a statistic I was fascinated by that was just backed up by a friend of mine who's working on a startup idea around this as well for people looking for jobs. And he did some research, but it was in a McKinsey study before that apparently 80% of senior positions are filled by word of mouth, not by direct applications. And I was like, 80%? That's like really, really high. But then the research that my friend did, he said, I think there was only one out of their sample size who actually applied, who got the job through a normal application process, and the entire rest of the sample size had the same. And I thought that was fascinating because when I heard 80, I thought that's just way too high. But apparently not. Apparently that is the case. Like, for the listeners, if we're talking about something practical, the takeaway there is like
build your network.
Is build the network, but not build the network in the sense of always having an agenda when you go into things and always trying to sell people things. I don't know if I've been to some networking things, and I find the cringiest thing that can happen is when you start talking too quickly, someone starts to say, hey, I do this, and what about, like, just and again, it comes back to the openness. Be open, be nice to people, be interested in people, and you never know that, like, in a year's time or 5 years' time, you might think of that person and come back and then have a connection, but it's not going to be you're hiring someone in the after work drinks and pizza evening. You know what I mean? That's I think that's not the right approach.
No, it's very true. So to be honest, actually, I had another point I wanted to get into it, but I see the timer now. I see we are minus 2 minutes from the first section of the podcast or section of the episode. That's why I would like to ask one final question. If somebody is starting today, what would be your advice or your recommendation to that guy to have a smooth landing in the design world or in general in basically working fields? So
luckily for you, I wrote this down before we started. I made some notes, and I thought, and it said advice, and it underlined.
So my questions are not so unique.
No, but I mean, you sent me a few pointers as well, what you wanted to talk about, and so I think that was helpful. And I thought about this one because I think it's important to be clear, particularly in these things. If you talk about myself, I can talk for ages, but when you talk about advice, I think it's important to be clear. And what I decided on was everyone's a little bit different, and so I wouldn't like to give advice about be like this or be like that. I would actually say be yourself. Don't try to be something else, because that's not going to work. But really importantly, what I wrote here is facilitate what you need. So if you're working it's not about getting the job, but once you're working with people, it's not about you don't have to be a generalist, or you don't have to be a specialist. There's places for both of those people, and there will always be place for both of those people. So don't worry about that. You understand yourself, what your aspiration is. Not everyone has to become a leader or a management position, that's a very different job. Maybe that's the sub advice. It's a very different job. And so think carefully about if that's what you want. Do you want to lead people? Do you want that on your shoulders? You're going to do a lot less design if you're doing that. So, think about
True.
that. But the facilitating what you need part is, don't assume that someone else will do it for you. Even if you're a deep person or you want to just design and you don't want to be bothered with all of the like business stuff. I think it's possible to do that if even in a corporate context. But it does mean that you have to be involved in the process around what you're doing. Think about before and after what happens. And if you want things to come to you in a certain way, you have to ask for that or suggest a structure. Don't think that that's not your job just because you want to make nice designs. You have to kind of think, okay, well, how do I fit into the process? Understanding that the thing that happens before is this, you might not understand what strategy is. Oh, I don't understand what the strategists do, but you know what the outcome is. So talk to them, use your design brain, say, okay, well, what do you do in this process? What is the end result? And then try to structure that output in the way that you need it, whether that's a briefing or any assets or some form of storytelling that you might need, or suggest something like principles. We had experience principles at Meta Design that were designed specifically to be that bridge from strategy into design, because we saw that people were struggling to use the strategy part. They would just look at it and go, okay, that's nice, and then design something else, and so we're like, hey, that's not a really great way to have a thread running through. But that can come from a designer to say, I need this, I need things in this way in order to have the right materials to do my job. And so that's not your job. That is your job. And if you facilitate what you need, your working environment will be so much more right for you than just kind of complaining that people give you bad briefings and you don't know what to do with them and you just want to make designs. That kind of can feel there's a resistance that can be there in particularly creative people. I think certain kinds of creative people, it's like, oh, why do I have to deal with all of this? And actually, if you just put a little bit of effort to set those things up, you can keep giving those things to people. Hey, can you give it to me in this way? Why don't we use this process? And that will you're creating the space around your process to do whatever you want in between. Yeah. I think that's really important, because then you can be whatever kind of person you are. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to be pushy. You don't have to be the director or the leader or whatever. You can be a focused, expert-oriented interaction designer, but you can still make sure that you get things in the way that you need and therefore work in the way that you want to.
Okay. Yeah, that was great advice. Let's have maybe a quick break and then we will be right back soon. You told me that you also worked in a startup.
Yeah.
And the thing I always do myself is comparing the startup environment with the big corporate environment. Like I feel like when I was working in a startup, I myself were more excited about what I'm doing, and the environment also encouraging me to be kind of more creative in compared to the corporate job or in the big corporations. What was your experience? Can you compare the startup and big corporation?
I mean, so before I joined Meta Design, there were maybe two aspects that are interesting. One, I was working in a startup, but it was a long-standing startup, as I said, with people who were pretty experienced. They were a bit older. It wasn't like the classic sort of super young startup, but I was also in Beta House, the co-working space. That's where I was working from. And so I was also surrounded by other startups or pre-startup, people who had a little idea and they were working on it because it was also cheaper, at that time to exist in Berlin, without having to have a lot of traction very fast. So people were experimenting. It was an interesting time for experimentation. It was slightly less professionalized, I would say, less mature, but it was also interesting because people really tried odd things out.
Mhm.
So, I met people who were working at Ethereum at the time, before it grew, and, people doing random things with sensors and all of this stuff. And so I got to observe a lot of startups too. And now at MDX, I also consulted with a lot of startups since then, in terms of their design processes. So I kind of had like a lot of different inside outside views of all of these things. Um, and I think that, um,
Maybe let me ask you maybe this question. You prefer to work in a startup or a big
I
corporation?
so I I was about to talk about this. I think it's hard to say prefer or not prefer, because there are things that are good, like you said. There could be commitment, there could be this idea, excitement of the cause, and that's something a lot of founders struggle with also as they reach that growing pain of like maybe after 20, 30 people, it starts to get a little bit bigger, and then it's like, do we still hire people who are super committed to the mission? Do we really have to like believe that they are burning with a passion for what we're doing? Or can we also hire people in this more professional way where it's like, this is what you have to do, you do your job, and that's enough? Um, and that's always a growing pain, I think, with startups, is like letting go a little bit, particularly from the founder's side, letting go and saying, okay, as we grow, we need to, um, move responsibility away from ourselves. And that's going to come with a decrease in passion to some degree, or the same type of passion, that founder's initial idea passion. Um, but I think that in terms of enjoyment, and this is how I think it's connected, is inside of your team in a bigger company. So at Meta Design as well, I was quite proud. One of the things I'm most proud of, I would say, is the team that we built at NDX. How passionate and dedicated they were in a genuine way. It wasn't because they were scared or because they were, you know, I don't know, because we paid them double what they would usually do. It was those incentives weren't there in that
Hmm.
sense.
Hmm.
They were genuinely, they liked each other, and they wanted to do well because they believed they wanted to do well for themselves and for what we were building. And that, I think, is not easy. You mentioned it in the agency context of, building something that you're proud of, and pride. I think particularly when you have that distance, is difficult. Um, and so you can do that in a bigger company. I don't think that's something that's exclusive to startups. I
Yes,
think that you can.
agree. Yeah.
There's some very dedicated. I think it takes good leadership. That's not to say that I'm saying that I was. It wasn't just me, and B, it's about everyone. But I think there are some leadership decisions you can take that facilitate that
True.
for sure. Um, and I think that's a lot about giving people space to share things that they're passionate about, that are not only about output. So
Hmm.
having rituals, and we had a product design weekly that was, people were just sharing things that they thought were interesting. We tried that in lots of different formats,
Hmm.
different constellations. So people being able to share their own passions, even if it's related to their work, because they were passionate about what they do,
Yeah, that's very
is
important.
important.
Yeah,
Um,
indeed. Yeah.
and also understanding people on a human level. So whether that's like going as far as knowing everyone's Myers-Briggs type, each individual, or just kind of encouraging that human level
It was
compassion.
in
No,
a
both.
startup.
I would
Both.
say,
Yeah.
I think
Mm.
you can do this also in a big team. I would kind of like deconstruct the difference between the two, and say that actually I think it's about your attitude to like how you do collaboration. The biggest difference is the resources you have available to you, right?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. True.
so it's almost like you can make a diagram for this. So there's like two axes. One is resources, and the other one is autonomy. And so as the resources increase, the autonomy decreases, usually. So in a bigger organization, you can't just say, we're going to do it however we want. This is our pricing structure, because you don't decide the pricing, or you can influence it, but you don't have like you don't have the exclusive say on how to sell your own product. But you do have a large amount of resources. You don't have to worry about getting people computers. They just get computers when they join the company, and so on and so forth, right? Meeting rooms, the system for booking meeting rooms, for booking travel, all of that is done for you. So there's higher
Everything is
resources,
ready,
but
basically.
lower autonomy.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Agree.
and I think that's important to understand. But the collaboration methods inside of that, you're in control of. And I think that's the same for both. And you can use those, those things don't really require large resources. And so focusing on that part, I think, is really
Mhm.
important.
What measurements you are tracking for your satisfaction from one job? How do you define your
Mm-hmm.
happiness in what you're doing?
Um, it's interesting. It just reminded me of my old boss, David, had a whole spreadsheet for this that he helped me. Like he said, you fill this out, and it was very complex, and it had pivot tables and like different interpretations of my drive and what I love doing. But there are things that he gave to me some tools. I mean, I learned so much from him. I think I found myself repeating things that he'd said to me, to my team, as I then progressed in my career. But one thing that I've used very often that's very simple, one structure, that I think it's so simple it seems almost silly, but most people haven't done it, is to fill out 4 quadrants. What you're
Mhm.
good at and love doing, what you're good at but hate doing, what you're bad at but love doing, and what you're bad at and hate doing. And it seems so obvious that when you first hear it, you're like, oh yeah, I know that. But when you really sit down and say, okay, but what are things that I'm good at but I actually don't enjoy, or things that I think those are the 2 hardest ones. What I'm bad at, what I'm good at but don't enjoy, and what I'm bad at but do enjoy, can kind of tell you how you might want to transition. So if if you realize there's something that you're good at but you really don't like, and people keep asking you to do, you can work actively to kill that thing and say, I don't want to do that anymore. I think I have in the past I did. I think now my role is a bit clearer, or like but in the past I definitely brought this up. I did it with my team,
Mhm.
but I also did it for myself and
I see.
for my own progression. And the bad at but like doing is something that you might want to aspire towards. What courses should I do? Or you might ask, and I think it's very important in role progression to ask your boss or your manager to say, rather than expect them. And I was always a joy for me if someone came to me and said, I want to do this, even if I didn't think it was necessarily the right move. I was much happier for someone to come with ideas about what they wanted to do than expect me to just dictate it or tell them. I might have thoughts on a small level, but what your aspiration is your thing, right? That you should believe in, rather than, of course, there's mentoring, which is a different thing to like having a career conversation, like 365, review. And so I think that's really important to look at that quadrant and say, okay, what do I love doing, but I'm not really good at yet? Because that might give you a really good hint about where to progress.
True. Yeah. Actually, you talked about the mentorship. I was wondering if you have ever had any mentor in your career
So
path.
I would say that I was lucky to have like bosses, direct report, managers who were also very good mentors. And that is mainly, I think it's a mixture of luck. And we talked about luck and openness. So I decided to do or continue doing the things that felt good. And so I didn't leave those places because they felt good, but I was lucky enough to meet those people. So David was the one that I mentioned at Midex, and Stephen, we ended up working much more on a closer to equal level at the end, but at the beginning that wasn't the case. And Stephen was a great and is a great mentor to many people. He has a lot of experience. And so those people they were actively concerned with thinking about how people develop and how people learn, and giving input, not just you're doing this good and you're doing this bad, but kind of sharing a lot. I think that's an important thing. Maybe that's my excuse for talking so much in the podcast. It's like, because sharing, I think sharing a lot is an important. And I did, maybe one thing to add here, which I think was I learned from a peer group. I did like an extracurricular, or whatever you call it, it wasn't I did management courses as well. And those were great, but different. I also did a peer group with like a product leaders peer group, where we got together and talked about product leadership stuff. And one thing I learned from that the guy Martijn, who was facilitating that, said, is that he gave an example of like a Dutch rowing coach, like a Olympic rowing team. I think it was Dutch, can't remember. Anyway, a rowing team, and it was, if you just say, look at this other team, they're doing really good, and you just show a video and say you need to be like that, how much can you get from that? Whereas if you annotate the video, you start to say, it's really good because look at the way that he's like, he's pulling back on the stroke or not pulling back on the stroke. Look at the way that they're in sync. Look at the way that how high the oar is out of the water. So if you describe what is good, I think that's a really good way to mentor people, and I think that's also what I got from my mentors is understanding a why behind behind something being good. So not just I like this and I don't like that. That's sort of like dictatorship by fear.
I
People
see.
might
Yeah.
know when you'll accept or reject something, but they won't grow themselves because they don't understand what is particularly good. So if you see something you like, say, "Hey, I love this because look at the way that this moves. Look at the way that that really makes a lot of sense." I think always describing, over explaining is an important thing, so that people can understand.
And that's how you define a good mentorship, basically.
I think that a good mentor is not just talking about themselves and their career path, which is what you see on so many podcasts, so many articles. I did this. This is how I made $1 million or whatever. I mean, there's so much of this. And actually, that's not really what people, it's not going to help people. That might give them an aspirational goal. I wish I had $1 million, but it's
Yeah,
not going to give
true.
them the sense of, why is this inspiring to me? Why did that person make these decisions? I think that's really important, not just the outcome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's actually what I wonder at the moment, because you told me that uh, some of the mentor that you had, they were your boss, basically direct boss,
Hmm.
or manager. And
Yeah.
I find it a little bit difficult to make your manager mentor, because, mentorship is slightly different. To
Hmm.
me, the mentor need to be really open to your problem
Yeah.
and see the world from your perspective and
Hmm.
be honest about it.
Yes.
However, manager might have difficulty to do this all the time.
Yes.
But myself
It's two
also,
different roles, right? You're right. I mean,
yeah, and
you
mixing it
have to,
together is a little bit difficult. Yeah,
for sure. No,
yeah.
that's totally true. I agree with you. And I think that uh, we offered mentorship at MDX, and we specifically for that reason said you can pick anyone from the leadership team that, to give people the opportunity to just not, to really separate those things.
Hmm.
But we
Hmm.
also made it clear that it's nothing to do with performance. I think that there's, again, about the openness thing, though, mentors can come in many shapes and sizes. So from
True.
being at the co-working space and seeing lots of people there, sometimes I would ask myself, people who are very different to me or act in a different way, these kind of ways that I found almost uncomfortable sometimes about, like, I would never make decisions like that or with that level of speed. Or I noticed in particular one friend of mine who became a very good friend, he would kind of say yes to everything, even things that just are way escalated beyond what they should be. He would say, "Oh, let's do it." That his first reaction was, "Okay, well, how can we make that happen?" And whilst I don't agree all the time with that, I think this, what would he say about this situation? I did play that to myself sometimes in situations where I felt resistance. Oh, it's going to be a lot of effort. Maybe we shouldn't do this. I said
Yeah,
to myself, well, what would he say? He would probably say yes. And then what would happen after? So I think mentorship doesn't even have to be formal and structured in that way. You can also just watch people, be in a space where you're observing how people are and see what stands out to you. It's interesting how that person does this, so not being too narcissistic and surrounding yourself with everyone who feels the same to you, I think is also important, because even if you don't copy the people who do things differently, it's interesting. Every now and then you'll see something, you'll be like, huh, that's odd, like maybe I can try that, and then it doesn't feel as bad as you thought. So I think that's
yeah,
really important as well,
yeah.
having
It's an
that
interesting
different input.
perspective. Yeah,
You know,
indeed.
uh,
You do mentorship yourself,
I have done,
I
yeah,
assume.
yeah. I mean, we did. You mean for me, like I have a mentor, or I'm mentoring people?
You are mentoring people. I guess you have done
Yeah,
that
I
as
mean,
well,
we
or
we
you are
did it
doing
as
at the
part of
moment.
the team. I've also done teaching and stuff outside of design. I also taught music, like I taught guitar. I also ran a summer school for like German kids ending school, like kind of these particularly talented German like 16 to 18-year-olds basically. And so that was very interesting seeing them. I've had a few contact with like teaching environments. And I would say like the takeaway in general from that is still about this um, openness and encouragement, not teaching someone to do the thing the same way that you do, but trying to give people like tools to think. It sounds very abstract, but it kind of like saying tools and frameworks, I think, are so powerful. You can start to say, well, if you think about it like this, then try that, because in the end they will blossom in their own way, their own way of doing something, not expecting them to say, okay, I know the way to do it and you have to copy me, which is a very classic learning method that has some degree, it works kind of. But usually that trajectory is you learn the way that you're being told, and then you rebel and you break the mold and you decide to like stop doing you kind of learn the classical music, and then you like start playing like Jimi Hendrix, this kind of classic narrative arc, right? Of you being forced to stay inside of these confines and then you break out of them. And I don't think that's the only way that you can mentor or teach people. I think you can also kind of, if you look at Buddhist teaching, for example, a lot of that is metaphor and parables, right? So it's like
Yeah.
the lotus flower in the mud, or the rag on the ground that looks dirty and then you wash it. Like there's all of these. It sounds way more abstract, but I think it can make people more empowered and more kind of develop their own sense of style, almost, as it were, their own attitude faster than if you say, do it this way until you know enough to break the rules. I think that's can be problematic.
How important is the education in terms of your future, in your career, if it's going to help anybody to find a job, or it's an advantage or not? For example, especially the university certificate. I was studying my master here in Germany, and then I gave up on it. And
Right.
I heard from almost everybody that why you are doing that. Part of comments was like, you spent, of course, 3 years or 2 years for it. Just get it done and then get the certificate. And the part of the comments were like, come on, I mean, master is better than bachelor. You will get better money, better salary. What is your perspective on this?
I have to make a difference between uh, when I was studying to now. I think that things have changed quite rapidly, and it's one of the most exciting things that's happened in like the information age, as it were. And particularly now, I mean, we don't know exactly how this is going to turn out, right? But with the advent of LLMs and the fact that you can interact with them on your own terms, like in a style of your choosing, and if you're, go a bit further, you can really say, I want the information to be delivered like this. I think that's a very exciting thing. Maybe we can come back to that later, because I think there's a lot of potential there. But for me, like I said a little bit before, the learning for the sake of learning was very important. I didn't just learn stuff about Germany and German language. I also learned how to be analytical, how to be critical, how to take feedback from people who are experts in their field, and maybe sometimes disagree with them, sometimes agree. There's so many things that are really useful skills for the world of work that are not related to specifically what you're studying. Of course, there's almost two levels. The subject matter, which is important. So if you're studying design and you go into design, that's great. But there's also the secondary level of the value of study in general, the value of somewhat like collaboration. It's the same thing as doing a project. Someone asks you
Yeah.
to write an essay, and then you get comments on the essay, and then you have to think about that. I think that's very valuable. And so people just saying, oh, I'll learn everything on my own, is you can learn a lot on your own. And I did, all of my hobbies and these things on my own, or using forums. Though I used that was when forums were still a thing. I mean, Reddit, it's like the longest living forum. And we all know how that can be. It can be great and it can be ridiculous in equal
Yeah.
measure. So,
Yeah.
but I think exposing yourself to other people and the things that you do and asking questions and all of this, I think that's something that's very important. And you can do that outside of university, but you might not have the same level of like quality control as if you're working with people who really are.
First of all, it's very important why you are studying. Huh? If you want to just build the foundation of your career by learning something and then get the certificate and get into your working field, I feel like there should be a smarter way. Because just imagine if I tell you you need to spend 12 to 20 years going through the traditional education system to be able to find a job, then I guess you should ask yourself that if it's the best way. I mean, it doesn't sound so efficient. You spend 20 years for preparing yourself to get into the working field. But yeah, just maybe from your perspective, if you want to get a new team member, would you care about the certificate? Would you ask even what did you study?
No. Yes, I would ask what they studied, but not to check if it's related to the field. I would actually be more interested if they studied something else, you know,
Yeah, that's more
just because it's
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
Because you can
Mhm.
see when you look at experience, you can see whether or not the person has the, you build up, especially the more hiring you do, you build up like a sense for that. And then for me, people have asked me, now I'm thinking about it from the other side, but like I always read the cover letters. I thought cover letters were really useful and interesting. Like, how do they express themselves? What do they say? What kind of things do they say? Because there's a cultural fit aspect in the team as much as anything else. Of course, you have to have the requisite kind of like experience that can take many forms, but like have done the kind of thing that you will be doing is kind of helpful, unless you're hiring for a more junior position and you just see a lot of potential. Um, but if people, it doesn't sound like they kind of are culturally the right fit, I think that's also when you get 200 applications, how do you differentiate? That if people said, okay, I was a project manager here and there, and what it's like, okay, that's great, but it doesn't tell you as much. There's these two aspects that are really important. And so the studying part, it could speak for you if there's something missing in another part, but also if there's something really strong in the other part, the studying what you studied before. I mean, if I also were to judge, I wouldn't hire myself if that were the case, because I studied German. So I don't think I am in any position to say, "Oh, you didn't study design? Okay, then you're out." That would be rather
Yeah.
silly. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's true. Maybe let's get into what you're doing right now. It's a really big shift, but
Sure.
yeah, tell us a little bit more about your
What am I
project. Is there
doing?
anything that you're working at the moment that you're interested in? I'm not talking
Um,
specifically about the team or the project that you're working on. Maybe it's kind of
sure.
something you are enjoying doing it. So
Yeah, I mean, so I kind of was saying at the beginning, like took a little bit of a break because you don't always have the opportunity to do that, especially when you're talking about holiday days and so on. So I didn't have the opportunity to take a big break for a long time, and that was where I completely actually isolated myself. The first thing I did, and I think it's relevant in its absence, is I completely isolated myself from anything to do with product design, or
just,
I
Jack,
didn't.
maybe I interrupt you here. I'm not sure if
Yes,
we recorded that part that you said you are now
I
in
know, I
the.
know, I know.
Yeah, just wanted to maybe
Um, yeah.
explain that part one more time. Yeah.
So I just recently moved on from the company I was at, from Meta Design, and I decided to take, before jumping into something else, a longer period of time. Not that long, but still relative to the other amounts of breaks I've taken, longer. And so I isolated myself. I didn't watch videos. I didn't read articles, because I think sometimes it's helpful to just take a step back and come back to something to see if your perspectives have changed. So that was my first step, was just to focus on anything else. I have a lot of hobbies, I don't struggle to fill my time. And so now I'm getting back into it, like here we are.
Hmm.
And the first thing that showed me I was getting back into it is I was in a bookstore, and it had a lot of design books and things. It was very cool. I forgot the name, unfortunately. It's in Berlin, but it's very, very cool shop.
But that means you are a book
Um,
reader, huh? Am I right?
I read books for sure, yeah. But I read. I always have too many books to read at one time. That's my biggest problem. And I also read fiction, and I think fiction is also fascinating, and you can learn a lot from the way that relationships are built in fiction. It's the same thing. You can do a lot of learning through that too.
True. Yeah.
But the book that I found was called, I think, Designing Futures, or something along those lines. I have it somewhere here. But it was basically about how to design for scenarios further in the future, and various different structures and methods for doing that.
I
Um,
see. Yeah. Mhm.
so it's like taking design thinking, but kind of there are some other methods, because obviously the further you go into the future, the wider the scope gets. And so that's what I'm
Actually,
thinking about at the moment.
yeah, it's an interesting topic. I have read about that as well. Like, I forgot the terms, but there were also some specific terms about this topic. Like, for example, if you design a specific solution for current situation, that's the kind
Hmm.
of, you're basically considering the current world and current state of what's
Sure.
happening. But if you want to design something that is going to work for the future, then you need to also predict some parameters that is going to change in the future. So I
Yeah.
remember this double diamond design approach is that's going to work for the future-proof
Yeah.
solution. It's
Exactly,
an
and
interesting
that's
topic.
exactly
Yeah.
what they talk about. And they
Yeah.
talk particularly, I mean, we worked on a couple of forecasting and kind of like future design projects also at Meta Design. It was super. I think they were the most interesting, actually, in their own way, because you have to think about this a bit further. And the most interesting part is the discovery phase about how do you even find trends in the first place, or signals. Everything trends is a too much of a loaded term, and trying to filter through that and make connections that may not be there. Obviously, really thinking behind. It's like the absolute essence of this kind of why-oriented design thinking, where you really have to try and. Then there are some frameworks for that, like I think sometimes they call it PESTEL, sometimes they call it STEM. This kind of like sociological, technological, environmental. There's like a different um, aspects of change that you can look at. So how things are changing politically, how they're changing sociologically, how they're changing technologically, and then you start to see the overlaps between those, and then say, okay, this is what we think constitutes a trajectory in a certain direction. Okay, so that's the assumption we're making. What impact will that have on our solving of this problem in the future? And that's something I'm quite interested in at the moment. Yeah.
And I feel like this is something we need to consider in every project. Am I right? Like whenever you want to design something, you need to also think about the future.
There is an aspect of that in like sustainable design as well.
True.
Sustainable not
Yeah.
just in the climate sense, but like in general design that lives longer, that doesn't have a shelf life of 1 year. Thinking, okay, well, what is the systemic impact of this thing that we're designing? I think is usually not something that is the first question people ask, but it often creates a lot of technological baggage, or like design debt, design baggage, that only makes problems for people in the future when
Yeah.
they come
Yeah.
to say, well, we want to expand this thing, or we want to change it, or we want to combine it with something else. It's like, have you set it up to be able to do that or not?
Hmm.
Design systems play a big role in that as well.
True.
um,
True. But I feel like
uh,
so often it happens that we kind of ignore this part.
well, it's easy to ignore, right? Particularly, you were saying on the agency level, you know it's like, oh, we want to make the client happy, so all we need to do is give them something. Often you're designing things that then the client will hold up inside of their organization and say, look at this cool thing that we built, you know
Exactly. Yeah.
and so as long as it plays that role, that's considered a success. And I think that that's very shaky territory, or something you could say somewhat unethical, as a design approach, I think. um, but a lot of agencies work that way, right? As we've touched on, is like this, just doing something that's good enough, um, is, it's a way that you can do things. And so it's not like it
True.
doesn't
Yeah.
work. Some people will accept that. And I think that there has to be a degree of standpoint, like a kind of almost like a moral, ethical standpoint that you take, um, to not go down that path.
Yeah.
Um,
True.
uh,
Is there any project that you recently worked on and you feel like, as I quoted, like proud of it? Or
I mean, so I
by the way,
I
Jack,
think
I
there's
see
a
that you also won many. I don't know if many, or at least I saw some posts that you shared in your LinkedIn about winning Red Dot Award, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah.
It was last year or the year
No,
before.
that was we just won that one now. Like it was from a project from last year. I've been involved in, I think I wrote it down somewhere. I think it's four Red Dots and two IF awards and some other like German brand design awards. So there's quite a long list. I mean, when you work in the agency world, that kind of, it does
Yeah.
happen. But I think it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really exciting. Particularly the Red Dot and IF awards are quite discerning awards, and that's um, definitely something to be proud of. But I think, and sometimes it overlaps, right, with the things I'm most proud of. But for example, recently the last project I did before I left Meta Design was actually working on the Cologne Philharmonic.
Hmm.
Um, and those, cultural institutions also usually smaller budget. There's like also time constraints. There's a lot going on. They were changing the intendant, who's like the leader of the Philharmonic. So like a lot of change after 20 years. So that the previous intendant had been there a long time. And so we kind of did a strategic kind of shift. It wasn't a full-on brand strategy, but like a strategic realignment, then the design work for what is a new identity. And in parallel, or the main expression of that was also the website, because that's where most of the tickets are booked. Like 80-something% of all of their sales come through this website. And it was stuck a bit in the past. It hadn't been redone for a long time. And so I'm proud of how it came out, because it's much better than what it was. It works. It's much more modern. But I think I'm more proud of, usually I'm most proud of the collaboration processes, the work with the people. And I don't know if it's a music thing, but there was also Zonotone, which has been out. There's a project I did quite a few years ago, but it took 2 years. It was a long process, because it's a music library for production music. And it's essentially like almost like Spotify for production music, but then you license the music to use in TV or
Okay.
film or
Yeah.
videos, right? So if you need music, you go find it there. And it's great if you also if you ever need a
Probably,
platform, really good quality music and a lot of it, and you can search in a very specific way or in a very general way. So we had to rebuild that platform from the ground up.
But it's not AI generated music.
Not as far as I know. I mean, as I said, this was a bit long ago. I don't know if they're doing that now, but at the time it was all real music with real, very talented composers and really a lot of music. It was huge. And so I was proud of the product because it was great. It worked really well. So you have to have that part, right? But you know, as a designer, often when you look at things, when you've worked on it for so long, you just see, oh, I wish I'd done that differently. Oh, I wish someone else won't see those problems, but you just look at it and go through that list of nice to haves that you had to chuck out because you didn't have time.
Yeah.
But the pride, I think, comes from the relationship with the people. So Zonotone, again, both the Cologne team and the Zonotone team, they were really nice people, where the relationship between us and them was this one of like respect, where I remember in Zonotone, they even said, you have to tell us when we're saying rubbish, very early in the project, they said that. And that's something where when you can get into that mode, you can really act on solving the problems. It's not a hierarchy game. It's not and so that's where my pride comes in, is when you build a relationship that's so good that you can forget about the relationship and focus on what are we trying to solve here. I think that's something that one should be most proud of, particularly from an agency perspective when you're coming from outside. Why should they trust you? You're some random people coming in here. They don't know if they don't know you.
So building
so
this
when
trust
you build
is
that,
basically.
I think
Totally
that's
agree.
really something to focus on, not just your craft or your skill. You can be the best at something, but if you're not bringing that in a way, it's a bit like I said, to facilitate what you need for designers. It's that like on a bigger level when you're collaborating with more people.
Yeah, I would like to repeat the same thing. I mean, it's an interesting perspective. Like the product itself is not only outcome that comes from one project. As you mentioned, the relationship that you are building, that maybe in the future you will use them. No one knows what's going to happen in the future. And that's a very interesting point indeed. And as you said, you are looking for the next challenge for your life. What could it be?
Well, so
it's still design, or you're going to switch to music?
No, so I mean, those things did cross my mind. I will admit that I did think, okay, what if I did something completely different? I was at Meta Design for a long time. There was a lot of progression there and change when we launched MDX and all of this. So there was 7 years, but broken up into a lot of, particularly these 2 phases, pre-MDX and post-MDX. So it was very varied, but still a long time, right? It's 7 years. So I thought, okay, I'm actually getting a bit back into photography, but I don't think I'm going to go full time on that as far as I know, but I do want to explore that aspect. But I
you have
think
an Instagram, for that as well?
I have an Instagram for that too, yeah.
I would like to check your photos, because I'm doing photography as well.
Oh, yeah?
Or I used to do. I will share my Instagram with you.
Yeah,
check it later.
So I want to, indulge in a few of those things while I can, but I think for me, on a professional level, I like I said at the beginning, this career path, if you want to call it that, of this design and product design makes a lot of sense for me, because it unites a lot of my passions. So why stop doing that, And I currently see 2 options, which are quite broad options, but they're still relevant. One is this future-oriented design thing, and I'm still trying to work out what that would look like. So how would I move into future design and thinking a little bit further into, that kind of space? Or the classic one, I think, working for a company who builds a product that I think is great, and being in design leadership in that company. So maybe that's it could be anything like a music software, things that also align more of my passions. Music software, something to do with bikes or cameras, but it doesn't have to be, right? It can be anything that I think is interesting, but not agency. I think I'm ready to apply a lot of the things I learned on the agency side and go back to working inside of a company, which I did before the agency as well. I mean, I think that about this agency thing, the reason I so concretely said not agency, which is it doesn't, it really depends on the place or the way that it's done. But if I've seen anything from going, like, you're essentially part of your job is being a consultant, right? Particularly on the like leadership level or the strategic level, you kind of go in and you have to really listen to what problems people have in order to craft a response to that problem. Say, how can we help you? And if I've seen anything, noticed anything from having had the agency experience versus people who haven't, a lot of them think that their problem is unique to their company. And actually, if you've seen hundreds of companies over, big sizes, big, small startups, whatever, they're not all the same problems, but there is a set of problems that people have that I think could bring a lot of value is in terms of like, where would I be most useful is also using that to come and help and say, look, I've actually seen this happen before. These are different ways that we could address it. And I think that's why I have this instinct to also try that on the non-agency side.
Yeah, I agree totally with you. Let's have a very short break. We will be right back again.
Sure.
You call yourself UX designer or UX strategist. What do you call yourself?
I don't.
Or human. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I do struggle with these terms in general. I think they have a place and they don't have a place. It's like a dogma of anything, right? If you're too rigid with things. So I think what I have on my CV now is the director of product. I think that UX and UI, it's dangerous to separate them because they're so intertwined with each other. But of course, the disciplines are different, and some people, you can have a whole career as a UX person or as a UI person. But like I was saying before about knowing a bit about either side of the process, I think in an organization, it's a little bit dangerous to separate them because of the needed overlap. But I don't call myself I guess if anything, I would call myself a digital product strategist or something along those lines. But yeah, I do struggle with that. What do you say that you do? Yeah,
I have same here actually. I call myself UX generalist.
Yeah, I see that in your
just because
little window there.
Yeah, here I also put it here.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I couldn't find a better term to explain that I'm open for to everything.
Yeah.
And I experienced a lot in different fields while I was working. I would like to talk a little bit about the future from two perspectives. One is, of course, the technology, the AI, but the other thing is about, in general, what can be a future for a designer. Like, for example, you said not everybody is a leader material. Right. So what can be a vision for a designer who is going to start today? What do you think?
I think I know that there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and people are, there's the kind of catastrophists who are saying we're all going to be replaced, and then there's people saying you can't, replace human touch. And I think that it's generated, particularly like the internet sharing bubble has generated the binary sort of reactions is either we're all going to be fine or we're all going to be fired, and I think that is, we can look back on technology and see how it's progressed in the past and understand that the shaping of how we use tools and where to use them and how to solve identifying the problem. I mean, half of the job of, particularly in digital product, and you could say UX, but as like I said, I prefer to, maybe that's the best term, digital product in general. It doesn't help people understand what you do, but I always say I work in digital product design. Half of the job there, or maybe even more than half, it depends on how you look at it, is, particularly from an outcome standpoint, did you try to solve the right problem or not? So it's not like, of course, there's a ton of work that goes into solving the problem too. The how do you design the thing? But the beginning of like, what are we even trying to solve and why is
And for
something
who?
that
That's also a
for
question.
whom, like for what outcome, for whom, how does it affect other people? How can we do that then within the constraints that we have? There's the beginning of the how. Very difficult. And that's been the same pre-industrial. Artisans were doing that when they were creating like armor for knights. Okay, it needs to be light, it needs to be protective, but it needs to allow them to move. And so on. It also maybe has to look good, or it has to display what I don't know, what kingdom they're fighting for, or whatever. Or the printing press. That was a solution to a problem because people were literally sitting there writing copies of books, as opposed to like, how can we distribute knowledge faster? So that level of thinking about how can we solve a problem, what is the current state of the world, and then like kind of the now state and the desired state, is something that will always exist, because that's part of the fabric of reality. And so I think seeing your job as a designer as playing a role in that is very important. And AI and the AI tools are means of reaching, outcomes of those or solutions to those problems. But it doesn't mean that they can't think on their own yet. They're not going to come up to you and say, hey, by the way, I've discovered this problem. I think we should work on this. Maybe that will happen. But at the moment, we need people who are going to use the tools to solve the problem.
So you see the AI for now as a tool.
It's how it's working for us right now, I would say. And there's another layer to that. So if you look at electricity, for example, I don't know how much about how electricity works. I know some of the things about it. What I do know is that when I plug something in, it usually doesn't explode. And so I use the infrastructural layer of electricity all the time to do things without understanding that I don't have to be an electrician. And I think there's an infrastructural layer of AI where the invisible part that we won't see of how and it's already, this is not new, actually. This has been going on for a long time, but it might increase. There's an aspect to which it will go unnoticed, these kind of small bits of process that it's taking over, which won't affect our work at all. And so I think there's a wider conversation than just this very output oriented, is it replacing our job? There's a whole other much more fundamental shift happening as well about how the world kind of operates, that may have nothing to do with design. The creative AI output is a very niche part of what is actually going on in terms of this shift. And so we shouldn't be blind to the wider implication. I think it's very important.
I like if one day AI can really replace me. I prefer not to work, but if there are some regulations, of course. The majority of the tasks that we are doing at the moment, I feel like they are not really innovative, so to say. And I'm just repeating same thing again and again and again. And I would really kind of appreciate some automation there with the power of AI. But I'm just saying it. Of course, I believe there are more into it, as you mentioned, like how we manage the resources for AI calculations and everything that is going to happen, the environmental perspective of these technologies. There are a lot that we need to consider. But yeah, what AI tools are you using at the moment? Is there anything that you're really intensely using?
I think of the things I use most. I do use ChatGPT a lot.
For your work, work, or for?
For both. So there were some, there were constraints around what we could use at work, but there were kind of like our enterprise versions. And I did use them. And I think there, in the work processes, what I found it very useful for was structuring and restructuring information. So the ability to like dump a lot of thoughts and have them just not even massively changed, but restructured. And then you could say, separate this into these like thematic buckets, or write it as a list, or put it in an Excel sheet. So also this kind of like the metamorphosis of information, where you keep the information the same, but you kind of have different expressions, or you have different formats for it, I think is a massive time saver. It's boring, right?
Absolutely.
In comparison to, but it's really useful because there's so many, like you said, so many manual things that you have to do, or checking consistency in the way that maybe how might we questions are written, or kind of user stories, there's like, you can even say, okay, can we make sure that these all have exception criteria or not? Or are they written correctly? Or is there any critique you would have of these in terms of how they're formulated? Are they clear enough? Things like that. You get a little bit more creative, but you're still not saying, write me all of the things, but you're using it as a kind of way to help with consistency or a way to help with completeness. You could even do things like, here are the notes. This is the transcript from a meeting that we had, and here are the user stories that we've written. Did we miss something? Because pattern recognition is a thing that's very powerful at. And I think stuff like that, if you're a little bit creative with how you set up the prompts, you can do a lot of double checking to improve the overall quality of the work before you say, do all of the work for me, right? Because obviously that's not the solution.
Totally agree. Last week, and one of our colleagues, actually, Jonas, showed us this new feature in Condense. I'm not sure. I've never worked with the tool itself, but I'm not sure even if I'm saying the name right or not. But you basically dump or record all your user walkthrough tests, with them, this cognitive walkthrough test. And the application is going to basically take out all the highlights, use the transcript to build the knowledge base that you can use the chat interface to ask question about it. Like, for example, what are the pain points of all the users? And then you get the result in the list, which is going to help you a lot.
I think there's two things that I think work against human replacement. One is humanity's desire to be involved. There's like a drive for involvement that people have, and so like that's why do people start making art or crafting objects? Like, and we're always going to want to do something, and so I think there's that part is that we don't really want that. And the other part is, like I said, the use of the tools until we get businesses that are just fully run by sort of humanoid robots that are powered by AI. We need people to choose where to use what tools. And in the same way that any tool is an extension of our capabilities, whether that is like, a printing press or it's an LLM, I think that will continue for at least some time. So if we understand that, then it's important. And to be honest, what I've seen from people in companies using AI so far, not startups with ideas about what AI can do, but people using AI inside of a company, it's so not advanced that I think that before we go to the crazy ideas, people need to start to understand and get comfortable with the medium. Like, what can I actually do here? How can I start to manipulate this for my benefit? It's like when Google first, launched, people weren't good at Googling for stuff, or maybe how to use a library. How do I even use a library system? It's a bit like that. I think we're a little bit still there with AI on like day-to-day business for the average person. We often, I think, there's a bit of a red herring when big, startups start doing really crazy agentic stuff and saying, okay, you don't need to do anything anymore, because that's a very small subset of the working world of people. And that world still has a lot to catch up on in terms of even feeling comfortable with using the tools at all. Interestingly for me, it brought up a lot about the personal data stuff that I was working on in the past. I wrote white papers on why personal control over personal data is better, and human-centric personal data models make sense. Those things coming up again because the agentic AI in particular, but a lot of AI features work best when they are fed with a ton of information. They get the context, right? And in some projects, that's easy. You can just feed it with a folder and then it has the things. But if it's about your life and you want like an agentic thing to help you out, it needs to know a lot about you. And so it brings up a lot of those things about, well, what data should it have access to? Who controls that data? Is it on device? Is it not on device? And so on. And so that I hope that will start that discussion again, because those answers were not given at the time. They still don't exist now. And so I hope it's another opportunity for us to find solutions for that. But as you say, if it continues completely unregulated, I think there are a lot of red flags there in terms of what that means for personal data moving forward. But that's a whole other discussion. I think that we could have a whole multi-series podcast about that.
But interestingly, I mean, I was thinking about this topic also last week when I saw this humanoid robots that are getting commercialized. Like you can even purchase it now for $20,000 or something. I was thinking it's very fun that you have someone here to do your, stuff, to do the chorings, to do the shopping. I like it. But the idea that, so far we had all these devices, the digital products around us that were collecting the data in some formats,
Mm.
but none of them had hands or legs to walk around. And now I'm
Right.
imagining I bring someone with like a robot with the eyes and hands that can
Yeah.
really physically interact with the environment. It's kind of a little bit scary.
But I think if you think about healthcare, there is a definitely not just because you can, it doesn't mean you should. But if you think about the healthcare industry, not as an industry, but as a thing that's helping people, and there's a huge number of, like, we put aside right now the huge amount of risk and the need to be extremely careful in doing things like this, but the potential for digital healthcare in general, even not AI related, but particularly with AI, like the scalability of access to high quality care, which is like famously concentrated in like more wealthy areas or more privileged environments, and also in countries where you don't have universal healthcare, is also kind of like only available to people who have the right benefits and all of this kind of thing. So people actively avoid getting healthcare treatment because of the fear of the cost. The ability for digital healthcare to have an impact, particularly AI-driven digital healthcare, is huge, but the risk of it going wrong is also huge. And so I think that there are some very exciting opportunities there. But yeah, these fundamental things about how is the AI, the pursuit of AI managed in terms of, is it all about profit and winning? You talk about competition between the big companies. Competition has a winner, right? And I think that we have to think quite critically, extremely critically, about whether or not this is the type of topic we're trying to win in,
Mhm.
or if that
Yeah,
actually is the wrong place to start in the first place.
true. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely right. And if there is something you want to automate in the design process, let's
hmm.
say, I don't know, you would like to get rid of one action in your working flow, what would that be?
Mm. It's really boring, a really boring thing, but um, I mean, I'm hesitant. The reason I'm hesitating so much is because, so as you know this, right? So much of the benefit in the design process, you can't skip. Like people say, trust the process. If you do a design sprint and you try to skip the discovery phase because someone thinks they already know the answer, that's like the thing that you don't do. And so I'm really
We're
hesitating,
supposed not to do,
there.
but unfortunately, sometimes we have
It
to.
it
Yeah.
it sometimes, I also wrote this down, like the more experience you have, the more gut you have to trust at some point, but you
Oh, yeah,
ideally
true.
just make as much space to discover, like, to do that as possible, because skipping it will usually, it's a surefire way to reduce the quality of the result. It's going to reduce less the more experienced you are, because you probably have done something like that before, but it's still not the right way to do it. But even things like coming out of a meeting and having someone, having the takeaways, the discussion documented, and the takeaways documented. I know this is already possible, right? And it works and it's very good. This is something that I think is very valuable, because I don't think that my project manager at the time loved writing those things down. It's useful for people to think about what they have to do, but it's essentially, like I said, a data transformation task, right? We already had the discussion. So why does someone
Yeah.
then have to write it all down and then format it and then send it to someone? Why that, you know, it makes the same level of information available to everyone. It makes sure nothing's left out. I think it sounds so boring, right? It's not the answer that I think is most inspiring to people, but I don't want to remove people from doing that process. I don't think we're talking about skipping things. But like I said, other formulations of how might be questions and stuff, I think is also maybe useful, but we have to be very careful not to skip the thinking. I think it's important.
I guess a part of this also comes from this fact that you really enjoy the process and not only the result.
Mm.
Uh, when you
Particularly in
enjoy
an
the,
agency setting,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, it's a kind of
Because the
creative
client
process.
gets
You
on board if you're doing it together. You get, like I said, the relationships. You don't build those relationships if the answer is just spat out for you. Whereas if you're sitting in a room going, like maybe we should do this. Maybe that's really old school. It's possible that this is a very outdated view, mine, and that, like,
Mhm.
that's going to be dead in 5 years' time. I don't know, but I would feel a loss if I didn't have that part of the process. I would feel like it wouldn't be as inspiring to me. Yeah.
I totally understand you, especially in the working field that you are working at the moment. Like as a strategist, things are different in compared to what I'm doing at the moment. Like for example, I'm a bit more busy with execution part. Uh,
Mm.
there are a lot of potential there for AI to make things faster, even
Mm.
produce a higher quality outcome. But I guess I totally agree with you. Like for me as well, building this relationship with everybody within the team and outside the team is the most interesting part of each project. Doesn't matter what I'm doing. And
Mm.
yeah, I would say, I guess maybe we can get back very quickly to the first part of the topic I shared at the beginning, that what can
Mm.
be the vision for a designer who is going to start today. Again, what should I
Mm.
aim for? Should I become a leader at the end? Should I become a CEO? I don't know what is the fancy titles. I know it's a very individual question. Like everybody has different
Mm.
expectation from life, but yeah, I just want to know, what do you call achievement for a designer?
Oof. I think that that's a very it is a it's a big and deep question that's very individual. I think if I there's a lot about understanding yourself, and that's that seems obvious, but I think a lot of people think of that as a personal thing that's not related to work. But I think understanding what drives you, particularly in a, design is quite personal. You're always told to kind of detach yourself from the design. It's not your baby. It's not art. And that's all of that is true. You're solving other people's problems. Design is not about you expressing yourself in the way that art might be. There is, of course, a lot of expression in there. But understanding what drives you and coming back to that thing that I said, what you love, good at and love doing, good at but don't like doing, and so on, like
Yeah,
understanding that and checking in on that regularly, will help you understand what it is that, like, how you feel, and then bringing that to, don't not being afraid to talk to someone with more experience and telling them that. Because if you just say, give me some advice, that's very difficult. But if you say, hey, I've done this thing and I really feel like I'm good at these things, I'm not so good at these things, but I would like to do them, but these I really hate, they might be able to tell you what that means for you. If I hadn't had someone say to me, hey, you might be good at, in the UX team, I would never have even moved into the area of UX. That's because someone came and said, you're doing all of these things. That kind of seems like it would fit you really well. And so kind of going out there and asking for that advice, but with a little bit of structure, with the understanding what it is that you love and what you don't love and where your strengths are, and kind of constantly checking in on that, I think is not constantly, but like, every year or so, at least, thinking about that, what really brings you joy. I mean, what you asked me at the beginning, right? What is inspiring me at the moment? That's a continuous process, thinking
yeah,
about where your
yeah,
inspiration is coming from and listening to that little voice inside your head, becoming more attuned to it, I think is really important. It's not super practical advice in that sense of do this thing, but I think it helps create your compass. And like having a compass and knowing how to read that compass, is a really useful thing to give you the agency to decide what direction you're going in, rather than just wait for someone to say, okay, yeah, you want to be a design director now, cool. That's the only step we have. You could say, but I don't want that. I actually want to be more of an expert. I want to dive deeper into this topic, and I don't want all of that leadership stuff, because then I get to design less, and I love designing. Even if that position is not available, if you have already thought about that, maybe it could become available if you go along and say, hey, I want this. Or the other way around, if you want to go into leadership, someone might tell you how to do that. So I think really thinking about where those desires are in your brain is very important.
yeah. So maybe the last few topics. I guess we had a very nice chat so far, and if it's up to me, I would actually continue talking.
Sure.
In this terms, I'm a little bit talkative, but yeah, I would say maybe we can just stop it somewhere around here, and we can have another session if you're also interested in. But before we do that, maybe share a couple of resources with me, like how do you
Mm.
learn new stuff at the moment, or how do you try to keep yourself up to date? Is there anyone in
Mm.
particular that you're following at the moment, or which I'm going to share with everybody else if there's any link or
Yeah.
something?
Um, so the one I think slightly standard answer, but people don't use enough, is that I found that whenever I started to think about a topic that was relevant, or that I thought maybe we need to start thinking about this as a team, that the Nielsen Norman newsletter then had an article on that. Like it would come in a day later, or a few days later, and be like, ah, there you go, and so I think Nielsen Norman have really done a huge, what their like service to the world of product design is very undervalued and underestimated. And I think it's something that should be really pushed. I don't necessarily agree with everything they say, and but look at what they're talking about. Even if the content, there are points where you think, I'm not sure about that. The topics are a really good way to understand the lay of the land right now in terms of, I don't quite know how they do it, how they produce content fast enough to really be like, it feels like when either I'm slow or they're fast, because when I have a thought, then it's there, and I'm like, that's really cool. So that's one, but otherwise I think I kind of take a more scattered approach. Like, of course, there's like the TLDR newsletters and things like this where you kind of see the headlines, but now that's also, you can start to curate that with AI. That's also another tip that I would give, is you can build quite cool, resource pulling things with AI. So I would experiment with that because it's a good opportunity. But I think those are the main ones in terms of, of course, I watch YouTube videos and things like this, but I let myself be surprised by those. I don't always go to the same creators because I think a lot of people have a lot of different things to say. I've recently been also put onto Chinese tech reviewers because they review tech in a very different way to the kind of classic US kind of person, and it's often a little bit more practical, but also some of the lengths they go to and the production value, and also the tests that they run, the automated like tests of battery life. I watched one about, it's like, we tested 6 batteries over 2 years to see if like different charging methods really have an impact on like how your battery health declines. And it's amazing, like, it's crazy the level of effort they go to. So that's also worth checking out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also always worth, if it's like design, if you like tech and product design and you're thinking about what's cutting edge, look at like what small like hobby people are doing in terms of, like, there's a guy who made this thing called the Hollow Mat, which is like I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like a desktop mat that has a projector, and it like projects things and you can interact with it. And it's just amazing the automations that he's done with this. Looking for people like that who have done passion projects which are not production ready at all, I think, and trying to ladder that, like, where could that go, is a really interesting way to see, I think, how like form factors might change and how like interaction methods might change. So look at people who are doing this, the kind of crazy, the mad scientists, right? They're doing these kind of tinkering projects with things that are totally impractical and like made, like totally hacked and made of random parts and things like this. I think that's I love to watch them, but also I think it's a way to understand what might be production in like a few years' time.
My last question is, how was Now Next? And that's the part actually you
Great.
started to share in the middle of it. I just want to ask everybody that how they feel and what they think that should be improved, or how we can, like, which kind of topics are more interesting do you think that we should cover more?
I mean, I think I would say the kind of again, like with the kind of design discovery process, I think it's a lot about your vision. Like, I think I also said that in the message to you at the beginning. It's like, what do you want to bring across? But if you found, like, I would do almost on instinct, that there's something that we talked about that inspired you, I would bring that up in the next one and say, hey, last time I talked to this guy, we talked about this topic, and something he said sounded really, even if it's wrong, like I didn't agree at all. What do you think about this? Like the things that flagged to you, I would use those as the fuel for the next episode. Like, because it can also be interesting to, okay, what was your background in this? But also, who cares about who am I? I'm kind of nobody. So in that sense, I think
I don't,
that, no, but like in the sense of, in the grand scheme of things, why does anyone have a reason to care? But if you you could create a nice domino effect of like, if I said something you thought was strange or cool or whatever, bring that to the next person and say, okay, someone said this, what do you think about that? And it might just keep going. You might create like a waterfall of, and then you could look back after 10 episodes and realize that there's a thread building like from the beginning to the end of like this one topic with a lot of different opinions. That could be an interesting like thing to add, into the mix.
Yeah, so basically building the connectivity between the contents,
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the thread of thought. Yeah, okay, yeah, great. Thank you very much. And if you want to name one person that you would like to see in this show, it can be your friend, it can be anyone that you know, that you feel like they have also interesting story to share.
I would love to see someone who's like also like I said, one of these more mad scientist people to kind of get a sense for their creative process, like the the holomat guy or someone like along these lines. I think there's a Swedish guy who makes crazy contraptions like pianos made of lasers and things that I think these kind of people, engineering people, could also be very interesting to talk to in terms of their use of technology, right? Because I know that there's like a clear value, or it's more interesting for people working in this field if I'm talk about very relatable experiences, but maybe there could be like special guests who are kind of a bit more really following their passion and kind of seeing what their view on things like AI and like how they're using it could be, because they're using it in a very different way, right? And that could be quite interesting fuel.
Thank you very much, Jack. Amazing talk, and also amazing to see you again after 2 years.
Yes, it's been a long time now.
Yeah, time is really flying. And thanks to everybody who is listening or watching us. I hope it was a nice episode for you as well. I will also leave the links to your social network, Jack, somewhere on the screen and also in the description of the episode. Doesn't matter where you are watching or listening to us. Please also don't forget to subscribe and follow us in different channels that we are publishing our videos and episodes to stay tuned. Any last word, Jack?
No, I think it's great that you're doing this. So thanks a lot. I feel privileged to be invited. So thanks a lot for having me. And I'm really curious to see who else comes and what they have to say.